Hi, everyone. Chapter 7 of your book talks about correlations and regressions. If you recall back to your statistics class, a correlation is a regression with only two variables, and a regression is an attempt to find a line of fit that is roughly equal distance from the vast majority of points when two continuous variables are plotted. Now, how are continuous variables plotted? Well, there's really only one way to do this, and that's scatter plots. You've likely created lots of scatter plots in Microsoft Excel by going to Insert, Charts, clicking on the scatter options, and likely choosing this option that allows you to plot the line that best fits the trend of your data, which is the regression line. This week, let's look at how to do that in Tableau. To begin with, we have our data we've seen before loaded in Tableau about employee burnout and supervisor humor. Something important to point out, when you have measures that are continuous, often Tableau will list them twice. The listing that is labeled the same as you have it in your original data source is your raw data. The second that will say count beside it simply shows the number of people who responded or the number of entries you have for that variable. Now, as we saw the last time we looked at this data, when I take employee burnout and supervisor humor over into columns and rows, Tableau defaults to creating a scatter plot. But again, it's aggregating that data, so I have to tell it to plot it as dimensions. Once this is fixed, I can add my regression line. To do that, I move away from the Data tab that we spent our time in so far and go over to Analytics. Here I can select Trend Line and drag Trend Line over into the data. Now, I haven't released my mouse yet. What I can do now is choose to hover my mouse over linear, logarithmic, exponential, polynomial, or power. And Tableau will plot the type of trend line I've selected once I release my mouse. I would like to see a linear trend as best as it fits, so I'm going to release my mouse over linear. And here's our regression line. When I hover my mouse over it, it shows me that the R-squared value is 0.03, essentially. That means that this data indicates that roughly 3% of employee burnout is accounted for by how humorous they perceive their supervisor to be. And it's a negative relationship. See how the equation says supervisor humor equals negative coefficient times employee burnout plus a y-intercept? That tells me that the more humorous the supervisor is, employee burnout goes down. Now, 0.03 is not a very powerful R-squared value, but is it statistically significant? Yes. Our p-value is 0.02. The heuristic we use for statistical significance is 0.05. So we see that even though supervisor humor has a very small impact on employee burnout, it is a statistically significant impact. Now, trend lines can be treated as a living part of any data visualization in Tableau. If I go back to the Data tab, and I create a matrix of scatter plots by moving a categorical variable into the worksheet, my trend lines are retained. Here, we see that for those who identified as third gender or did not disclose their gender, the regression is not statistically significant. And again, we're not surprised because we have so few data points. But here, we see that the R-squared for only respondents that identified as female is 0.05. That's quite a bit higher. And for males, it's not statistically significant. So breaking this up by categorical variables tells a more interesting story that actually the difference when supervisor humor positively impacts burnout such that it reduces burnout is only happening for female employees at this company, not for male employees. And that's an important distinction. Categorical variables that change whether or not a trend is statistically significant across groups are called moderating variables. Checking for moderating variables is an important part of any data storytelling exercise. And this finding that there's a gender effect tells an important story that we would not have seen without fully exploring this data. I hope this overview of how to incorporate trend lines and why they're important in Tableau has been useful. If you have any questions, let me know.